One of the things I'm asked about constantly is Baroque ornamentation. Ornamentation is a huge topic. There's only so much that I can really cover just in a short video, but I wanted to point you guys in the direction of where you can look if you're looking for more information on how to ornament in the Baroque period, and also just give you some ideas for starting places and what to be thinking about when you want to be ornamenting something. If we're focusing specifically on 18th century ornamentation, which I think is most of the time what people are asking for when they're looking to ornament Baroque music, there's basically two big styles, which is the French style and the Italian style. Composers in Italy were typically writing what we refer to as a skeleton melody, meaning they wrote what they wanted the basic melody to be, but they expected the performer to add and embellish much further beyond just what was on the page. They, however, didn't indicate usually what they wanted those ornaments to be. It was just expected that you would know how to do that. And that opens a much broader point. Music education in general was a little bit different in the Baroque period. It was very common to be well-versed in music theory and composition, as well as playing your instrument. If you can imagine a time where playing music was a little bit more broad, you can see why ornamenting was so popular in the Baroque period, as well as improvisation. The musicians of the time period just had a better skill set for being able to make things up on the spot, whereas classical music these days is very oriented towards reading off the page. So if we open ourselves up to learning a little bit more about the types of things that they were learning about, it becomes a lot easier to start improvising and ornamenting on top of music. Pretty much all Baroque composers did expect their performers to ornament. There are some arguments that composers like Bach actually wrote out what they wanted their ornamentation to be, and if you look at Bach and some other works, you can boil a lot of that music down to a more simple melody and see where Bach has embellished and added things. That being said, again, it was really common in the time period to be adding things as a performer, so I think there is some freedom to do that in nearly every piece we play from the Baroque period. So back to the Italian style. One of the things that we see in Italian ornamentation is long florid lines sort of filling up spaces. So something I can use as an example is the opening of Vivaldi's E minor cello sonata, which starts with an octave. Now we can just play this octave as normal, but especially because it repeats, it's a great opportunity to fill in all the notes in between the octave and make a pretty simple ornament. Now you need to know your music theory because you need to know which accidentals to apply when you're filling in notes, but also just using your ear can help a lot. So the opening of the sonata goes like this. So already in that octave leap that we have, we can choose to fill those notes in. I'm going to be thinking E minor because that's what I'm playing in. So when I fill in, I'm going to use the sharps for E minor. And now I have an ornament for the second time I play that theme. Another important place to always look for an opportunity to ornament is a cadence. Anytime we reach a cadence, there are some opportunities to do something, usually with trills, but there's a lot of other options. So if I continue through the sonata by Vivaldi, I'm going to come to another place where I have an opportunity to ornament. So there's our first resting place. The trills that I played before are written in by Vivaldi, but now when we reach this cadence, there's no ornament written there. So we have the opportunity to do trills or just add a little something extra to that if we want. So just using the notes that are already there and usually just adding a trill to the note above can already add a little bit of extra flair and make your interpretation a little bit more personal. Talking about trills kind of leads us naturally into our French style of ornamentation. While the Italians like to fill in big spaces, play lots of long sweeping lines, the French style in general had a lot of note-specific ornaments, meaning that the ornaments were generally centered around one note using some kind of trill. And the French get really elaborate about it. Couperin wrote a great treatise where he actually outlines how to do a lot of different types of trills, and there are actually a lot of symbols as well for what these different trills are. So especially if you're coming from modern playing, you're probably used to doing a trill in only one kind of way. But once you realize the possibility with trills, that's also a great way to start ornamenting your pieces. An average trill we may think of as this. If you know a little bit about Baroque style, you might have heard that we typically want to start trills on the top note rather than the main note. This is true for most cases. In general, what we want to emphasize with the trill is the dissonant note, and typically the top note is more dissonant, so we want to lean on that note. You also can vary the speed of your trill, which isn't necessarily ornamentation, but it's just a way to sort of stylize your trills. So here's a trill starting on the top note as opposed to the main note, with adapting the speed to be a little more expressive. A good general rule is starting trills slow and speeding them up as you go. But now that we have just a trill, we can also start adding terminations and other ways to sort of adapt our trills. And while I'm not going to go into the details of every single type of trill and how you execute it, you can look to Couperin for some of that information. Another way of thinking of ornamentation is actually sort of recomposing or rewriting certain parts of the music. I personally think the best way to get good at something like this is just listening to a lot of music. It sounds silly, but in the Baroque period, they were surrounded by this type of music and composition all the time. It was all they heard when they went to concerts, when they'd hear their friends play or their family play. So they were just more immersed in the sound and the options that they had musically. I know for me, what's made the biggest difference in ornamenting is listening to a lot of things and not necessarily imitating or copying them, but just getting the language more a part of my ear. Once you start to hear options and options and options of how to ornament something, you'll be surprised at how your own ideas just start to flow to you naturally. You should always have your eye out also for when a composer actually ornaments themselves. If we look to another Vivaldi sonata, number 3 in A minor, we can see a perfect example of how Vivaldi takes his own melody and writes a little variation on it. So here's the original melody. So you can probably see already how that's kind of a skeleton melody. It's fairly simple. And later on in the movement, he plays this, which as you can hear is basically the same melody ornamented a bit. So even just looking at what a composer does with his own melody can give you some ideas of how to change it up. Another good place to look for how to take one idea and sort of go somewhere else with it is looking to variation pieces. Variations on La Folia, one of the most popular ground basses of the Baroque period, were written by so many of the great composers, and they're really a great place to look for different ideas. Corelli, Moret, Scarlatti, Vivaldi, CPE Bach all wrote variations over the same chord progression, and just hearing them develop their own ideas over the course of a piece can give you some ideas of how you can change up some melodies. While ornamentation and improvisation is personal and a lot of it is up to you, I do think it's really worthwhile to get fully versed in the flavors and the language of the time period to really do, an ornament that feels historical. It's not so much about being historically accurate with your ornaments as much as it is just staying true to the style of the piece. Luckily, lots of Baroque composers wrote treatises and rule books and guides on ornamenting, so if you want to learn more about Baroque style, I really suggest checking out some of the treatises. We have Couperin's book on Trills, which is mostly geared at harpsichord players, but is really informative to learn all your different French symbols for trills. Then if you look at something like Corelli's violin sonatas, he actually published them with ornaments, and there are also some ornaments published by other composers from the time period, so you can see how all different composers put their spin on Corelli's violin sonatas. In addition, we have actual treatises by Tartini and Quantz that all discuss ornamentation. So my biggest takeaways would be consider the style, French or Italian, and how you want to apply your ornaments. Try to get as immersed in the sound and the language of the composer that you're working with and the time period. And last of all, do some good old-fashioned reading, see what some composers had to say about ornaments. There's a lot of talk about taste, what's appropriate, what's not, and how you can go overboard with your ornaments, so it's always interesting to hear different composers' opinions on the topic. More than anything, I think ornamentation and improvisation comes with time, so just start applying it to all your Baroque repertoire. Thanks so much for watching. If you want to learn more about performance practice and playing Baroque music, I have a ton of videos on my channel, and be sure to check out some of my performance videos as well. Be sure to subscribe to my channel as I do new videos every week, and if you want to help support me in the production of these videos, you can become my patron on Patreon. Thanks for watching.